You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is from a conversation at the Reservoir Center in Washington, D.C., where Waterloop is a media partner. This is episode number 221, Equitable Wash Solutions for Alabama and Beyond. Urgent water, sanitation, and hygiene challenges persist across the United States. Peer-to-peer support for utility professionals in these communities can make a positive difference. Anniestacia Denton, a utility advisor at Moonshot Missions, provides a look into these pressing issues with a particular focus on her home state of Alabama. Bringing a unique perspective on the severe sanitation problems in the Black Belt region, Anniestacia shares her journey into the water industry and her active role in transformative initiatives like the Unleash Hack. She explains how she is dedicated to resolving funding and trust issues in underserved communities, advocating for equitable solutions, and implementing practical, impactful changes.
You're in the water loop.
Coming to talk to young professionals, right? Other young professionals, if you will, about careers for change, especially like when it comes to this U.S. wash sector. What does that mean to you? Why are you here to be part of this?
Yeah, I think my background actually is not one that pointed me directly to water. I actually didn't know that the water industry was a thing coming in, but I think I grew up from a legacy of people who know what it's like to make it through challenges. And so I think a lot about my family's legacy. Like, I graduated, was the first Black female to graduate valedictorian from my high school. This same school system, my mom was a part of the integrating class for. And so there's that. And then her dad, he only had his opportunities that he had. He's an incredible contractor or construction worker. Never got his chance to kind of do the whole contractor side. And the generation before that, his mom was a milk nurse for families in the area. And so I think about that legacy that was paved for me and seeing that progress and knowing how much the way that they made the path smooth for me really helped me to be able to move to the next level, how impactful that was for me. And I really am passionate about doing the same thing for others. And I'm really grateful that I fell into the water industry, one where I'm able to really tap into that and help make the path straight for others in a way that's hugely important and critical when it comes to things like public health, the environment, and well-being. And so I'm excited for the career that I have and for the career and the experiences that I've been able to encounter on my own. And that I'm really passionate and excited about sharing that to the next person.
Well, those of us in water are glad that you fell into it too. You've been a great addition to our big water pro family for sure. How did you fall into water? I mean, that sounds like you just fell off a bridge. But how did you just, there's that question, did you find water? Did water find you, right?
Yeah.
So water found you. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I graduated from University of South Alabama in 2018. And at the last moment, I decided against going to get my master's. I was a single mom at the time, and I decided to go to industry. And I just so happened to have a mentor, Kevin White, who I'm currently still working with. He's doing incredible work in the Black Belt in Alabama. But he connected me with someone who works at Arcadis, and I was just like, okay, this is where I am now. This is the job that I have. I didn't start looking very soon, and so I just fell into that job. And then I started to fall in love with water actually during the earlier phases of Arcadis, and a lot of it had to do with WEF. So when you're just getting started at a new organization, you spend a lot of time onboarding and kind of poking around the company. And I ran into a publication that was put out about Ifatea Venner, who is an incredible human in general. At the time, she was the global lead for water and wastewater. She's a Black woman. I was just coming in as a young Black engineer, Black woman as well. And I was like, wow, she's incredible. And then at the time, it was a keynote speech that was put out on Arcadis' platform. It was a keynote speech she'd done for WEF Tech. And so she shared her story about growing up in Jamaica and Barbados and the water challenges they would have and how you just could not rely on the water being on or off from one day to the next. And I was like, honestly confounded. Even though I went through my whole degree program in civil, which included water resources, I did not understand that side of water was such a thing, especially like so close. And so I was surprised and blown away. And then also I was taken a lot by her passion and how she's leveraged her background of having that lack of access to now be the global lead for water and wastewater at this massive, like at the time, 20,000 person firm.
You mentioned being from Alabama, and then you mentioned the Black Belt, and it's one of these most tragic situations where the sanitation challenges, right? Could you talk about the situation there in Alabama for the people that somehow have not heard about this?
Yeah, sure. So Alabama Black Belt is a region in sort of central Alabama, and it spans across the rectangle of the state, kind of spans across the center, and it's known for this rich, dark soil, which is partially why the name Black Belt is brought in, but it's also a predominantly Black and also a predominantly really low income area of the state. And the reason why it has been coming up over the years more and more in these environmental justice conversations has largely been related to some of the wastewater sanitation challenges that you see there. And so this is an area where you see it not being completely uncommon to have people direct piping their waste sewage out onto their lawns where their children play and where their pets and animals play. And so the national lens has been growing in the Black Belt. Like, there's been researchers that have been getting more involved. I mentioned Dr. Kevin White, a mentor of mine, who, when I was under, I didn't realize the work that he was doing in the Black Belt, but who has been doing lots of work in the Black Belt for years, and who I've been now more connected with since graduating around that space. But it's growing, but there are definitely still gaps there. And so that's definitely a big passion of mine, both before I got here and then also now, especially that my full-time job is focused on supporting these disadvantaged communities with bridging their water access and wastewater access gaps. Like, now that's definitely a big passion and focus of mine.
Yeah, because there's far too many. I mean, you have that situation in Alabama's Black Belt, but you have a lot of communities around the country, 2.2 million people in the U.S., right, that don't have safe water or proper sanitation, and it's just not acceptable. I want to talk more about your focus on that, but also, how come there's not more progress being made with that situation in Alabama? Maybe you can talk about the hack that you helped to lead and, the challenges that come from responding or putting those things in place. It's complicated, but
yeah. And so I'll give a little bit of background on the Unleash hack. And so that was a very impactful thing in my career.
What is an Unleash hack?
Yeah. And so Unleash is a United Nations and WEF partnered organization that's focused on bridging the gap from where we are currently as a world to where we'd like to be as it relates to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And so typically it's an in-person event with about 1,000 young professionals, or talents they'll call them, that'll come together to innovate around the Sustainable Development Goals to help bridge those gaps. And with COVID, they went to the virtual, more locally organized hack events. And so I was introduced to Unleash. I'd seen a lot of what they do, and I was pretty intrigued and really inspired by a lot of what they did. But I was introduced through Barry Liner, who is the WEF Chief Technical Officer, or recently former WEF Chief Technical Officer, and has been a mentor, who's been a mentor of mine for a good while now. He got me involved with Unleash initially through supporting the organizing team for one of the hacks that was taking place. And this one was in Liberia, in Africa, in West Africa. And so that was really impactful. Like, being involved in that event, some of the participants that were involved, they had their own personal stories. One of the girls was just like, I could have passed away when I was a young child from diarrhea because of this preventable thing with our sanitation. And so that was hugely impactful and unexpected. It was one of those where you just call and you're like, hey, you know, what's your career been like? Me asking Barry. He's like, you know, you seem like you'd be interested in this. Go support this organizing team. And then after that, it was kind of a similar thing where he was just like, you know, they're doing this again. You're right there in Alabama. Why don't you lead the organizing team for one of these in Alabama? And at that point, I was maybe a year and some change into my career. And, you know, my organizing team would have been people that are basically all older than me and more senior in their career. But I think that I'm really glad that I did end up accepting that challenge to lead that up. And it's been an impactful thing in my career ever since. And so, yeah, I think that experience was eye-opening because, you know, it's one thing to hear about the challenges from an article that you read, and it's a different thing to get engaged with communities. And through that event, we got mostly involved with one community in particular in Uniontown, Alabama. And so that's what our winning solution out of the hack event was focused around. Specifically, was that community. And so we ended up having multiple members of other teams as well as our organizing team still being engaged with the community in the follow-up. And, you know, over time, we ended up having an opportunity through Arcadis to have some funding to have some support available to the community there. And I think, you know, just with different things elements that can start to play in with when it comes to, you know, different ideas and people that are all similarly wanting to see progress from different entities, but it just becomes a little bit political and difficult to kind of make progress happen. And so, you know, in the end, the funding that we had, while there was interest from the board, there's interest from the community, interest from the activists in the area, even the city council. There was interest from everybody, but it was just a matter of like
different perspectives.
Kind of getting, kind of getting that common ground. And
I mean, it's the same kind of challenges, not just with the hack, but that come up with addressing these problems overall, right? They're complicated. You got a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different perspectives, and also trust issues, right? You talked about that off camera a little bit, and how it can be difficult to go into these communities and work with them because of what they've been through. Could you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the community in Uniontown, the reason we were offering to come in, we were planning to do a kind of a value engineering. They'd had some different engineering ideas in the past that didn't quite go as expected. Some funding they'd gotten to get things constructed that didn't quite work as expected, and so they have some infrastructure that's been put in that's no longer being used, that's less than 5 years old. And when you're a community that's been suffering for a long time, that's really disappointing. And so that was a part of why we wanted to come in. But this community, you know, it's often not just the one thing. You know, I mentioned that the environmental justice conversation has been a thing in the Black Belt largely because of wastewater, but it's other things. And Uniontown is an example of that. They've had another big environmental justice concern in the form of a huge landfill in the area that has coal ash, and there's like kind of a concentrated cancer cluster surrounding that area, and the citizens are aware of this. And so
they just
when you come in,
everything is against us, everybody is against us. Who can we trust? Who can actually help us? Somebody tried to help, that thing didn't work, like, right? It's tough.
Yeah, so it's a challenge for sure, the trust element. And then also there's the funding thing, and I think that's something that I wasn't as aware of whenever I was involved with the Unleashed side of things, because they did have some funding that was looking promising in Uniontown. It's just a matter of how we could use it and making sure there's community consensus and trust. But we're working with another community in the Black Belt area right now through Moonshot that's kind of seeing this funding challenge that isn't quite an anomaly. Like I'm seeing it in the Black Belt region, but it's other places that we're seeing where funding is a big challenge. And so a lot of these communities, they're the ones where, you know, historically they've been underinvested in, and so their infrastructure is in a little bit of a worse condition, higher operations and maintenance fees and funding. And they also have a lot of capital that they're behind on, investment capital wise. And so they're not the ones that are like passing all the time with flying colors their evaluations from regulators. And so it's difficult whenever you get to a point where, okay, we want to do something about this. We understand that we haven't had the financial capacity in the past. How do we go about navigating this, application process that's based on us kind of having our financial things a little bit more in order than what is true for us right now?
And is that something that now you at Moonshot as a whole and yourself and your colleagues can try to help with, is like kind of getting their house in order and then tapping in? There's like this historic funding and there's so much talk about getting it to the communities that need it, like this one you're talking about. So, is that the opportunity?
It is an opportunity. It's definitely an opportunity. It is still a challenge. And so it's an ongoing conversation that we're seeing where, there's, even for a grant, it's even more difficult whenever you're looking for a loan, because even if you're a low-income community and there is a priority in getting funding to you, the loan thing is difficult whenever you've been struggling to pay your bills as a utility. And then even whenever it comes to grants, a lot of times you have to have like financial audits. And a lot of times these low-income communities, they've struggled to get auditors and to kind of have those consistently. And then when you have you have usually a rate analysis included, as far as like, if you're going to get a grant, we still like you to do a rate study and look at adjusting rates. But when your community members are looking at you and you're the mayor for them and they're like, we make $20,000 a year.
Right.
I know that the operations costs are this and the capital cost, if we were to fix everything, is this. And 500% increase is what you need to make this all come together. But I make $20,000 a year.
Right.
And so who are you going to go and get that from? And then you have these struggles with affordability programs and assistance programs in these lower income communities, because in the larger communities where there's pockets of disadvantage, there's also pockets of wealth. And a lot of times you can fund those through the more wealthy customers, paying a little bit more. Maybe you can give a discount to some of the lower income. But in these disadvantaged communities, there's not really pockets of wealth out there to borrow from. And so you're kind of stuck with the community that's just facing these new rates that are just kind of really make an impact on their ability to feed their families. And so,
So you've been with Moonshot now for just a couple months. And just what are you hoping to do when it comes to this, making your career be for change?
Yeah, I think the financial side of things has definitely been something that I've been confounded by just time and time again. The example that we mentioned, there's also a lot of privately owned systems, either small cluster systems like a mobile home park, or there's a community that I'm working with now. It's an affordable housing apartment complex. And so it's private. And then there's also a lot of individual owners who are also private and own their own on-site systems. But they're failing. Like I mentioned in the Black Belt, a lot of times people are direct piping their sewage. Some of it's because they can't afford septic systems, which are typical for on-site, but then some of them have septic systems that are failing, but they don't have access to the SRF programs or some of these funding programs and things from the federal government because it's private. And so I think that there's a lot of access challenges that I'm really hoping to at least initially, that's kind of the initial wedge that I'm really hoping to be in the conversations about how can we help equitable consolidation be something that we can help support. And equitable consolidation is a big thing because you don't want.
I have not heard that adjective put before that word before. So that's consolidation is critical. It's a way forward for sure. I believe it needs to be happening and at a broad scale and a rapid pace and all that kind of thing. And I've heard the idea hey, you need to make sure that everybody's considered and that happens in a fair way, but actually saying it as a phrase, equitable consolidation. Yeah. What's your, I guess lastly, what's your advice to those people that are in school, other young professionals that are learning about these challenges that are like, that's it, I want to get involved and make a difference?
Yeah. One thing that I would say that could really be of value is being curious. Like I mentioned Barry, who is always just bursting with ideas. You got to kind of be careful. But originally I just read his LinkedIn profile and I was like, he's doing very cool stuff. I'm curious about that. And I reached out and I was just like, hey, tell me about like what your journey has been. And the same thing with Ipateo. And there's a number of people. You learn so much about what's possible, and you can literally find yourself directly connected to some of those things that are possible by being curious and asking people whose work you admire. And so I'm excited about things like this. And so I definitely would encourage people that are here today to get curious, take a card from somebody who you think, that's cool.
Don't be afraid to approach people, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't be like too daunted, oh, they're higher than me or whatever. Just go talk to folks.
Talk to folks, definitely. Like, I'll get on LinkedIn to this day and just be like, man, this person is doing cool stuff, and just like shoot a little message, you know? And so I think being curious, and then especially in your earlier career, it's a little bit easier because you don't have as many home obligations. But looking at volunteering thing, like, I mentioned there was an opportunity at the back end for me to do some things through Arcadis and focus some time and energy on my work with Unleash. But early in your career, especially if you can make time for it, volunteering is a really, really valuable way to kind of get exposure and learn more about the things you care about. I'm coming to Moonshot now with like a bullseye in my head on like helping the black belt situation, which is happening right in my backyard. And I wouldn't have had that mindset had I not used some of my free time to get involved with WEF and then Unleash beforehand. And so.
Well, I mean, I know you keep referencing being early in this job or early in your career, but I mean, you're already a wealth of knowledge and great perspective. So keep sharing it with people. And I'm glad I got to talk to you for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. To find all episodes, sign up for email updates, and connect on social media, visit waterloop.org.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.